this sentence up here on the board says, reading with dyslexia is exhausting, and that is true. For many of us, reading is as automatic as breathing. But for millions of students with dyslexia, reading is a difficult task that poses constant academic and emotional challenges. I have given you this word puzzle to simulate the experience that a dyslexic child goes through when they are reading. So think about the time that it took you to do this sentence. I mean, those of you who were here at the beginning, you had 10 full minutes to try to discern what this puzzle said. What you've just done is relearned to read. You've taken these symbols and connected them with new speech sounds. But until this process becomes automatic, it's a very laborious task, very labor-intensive and very draining. So now think of reading this way as you encounter a word all day long. And that's how it feels to a student with dyslexia. So how can we help these kids read the way everybody else does? Well, plain and simple, you can't. They'll never learn to read the way everyone else does because their brain works differently. Now, in my first session that I gave, I explained how the brain functions differently by a normal child will use three parts of the left side of their brain to think through a language problem. But a dyslexic child only uses one part of the right side of their brain. So their brain is not thinking the same way that a normal child would. But we can help them, even though we can't teach them to read the same way as everyone else. We can help them relearn what their brain is telling them. Their brain works in a certain way, and we want to give them a way to process the information so that they can understand the information the same way that everyone else does. Now, before you can begin to unlearn a dyslexic mind, you have to know what they've learned already, because each brain works differently. So you're going to want to start with an evaluation. You can evaluate them by either having them read a paragraph. You can have them give a small spelling test. Yes, sir. You can give them a small spelling test. This will help you know and determine their strengths and weaknesses. But the best way to evaluate a child is just to sit and listen. Just talk with them and listen to them. The longer you can talk with that child, the more you're going to learn about them. The more you're going to see how they use their words. What are the sounds that they're making with their mouths? Ask them to repeat phrases to you that you've said already. The goal is to understand them. So if they say a sentence, is it the same thing that they're trying to write on paper? That's what you want to know. Is what they know in their head the same thing that they can produce? I recently evaluated a little boy named Timmy. He's in about the 4th grade. When his mother came to me, she started telling me about some of his problems, and I was intrigued. She thought that Timmy was writing his own language. Now, the reason for this is she would have him write a paragraph, and she'd try to read it, and she just couldn't understand it. But even if it had been hours later, and she said, Timmy, read this to me, he'd read it just as if you and I were reading off a sheet of paper. So she thought it was his own language. So I had Timmy come in and talk to me. I gave him a small spelling test, and of course he was spelling the words wrong. But I started to ask him just his basic sounds, consonant sounds, different things like that. I started to realize that Timmy was adding vowels to all of his consonant sounds. If I asked him to say the sound for B, he would say ba. But B doesn't say ba, B says b. So Timmy was adding that vowel sound. Then I also noticed that if I asked him, well, what does SH say? He'd say th. I said, well, what does TH say? And he'd say sh. So he was mixing up his sounds. Then I asked him to write a paragraph for me. And when I read Timmy's paragraph, I realized he was writing practically without any vowels. Because in his mind, all the letters had vowels to them. And he was also taking those sounds, those SH and TH sounds, and mixing them up. So I could understand what Timmy was doing, but he was only producing what his mind had taught him. So once you're able to understand the way that your student's mind is working, you need to make a plan for them. You want to set specific goals that would to allow your student to reach certain points so that they can become more strengthened in the areas that they have difficulties. So that you found in your evaluation. Sometimes, though, unlearning for a dyslexic mind means to relearn even the basics of the alphabet. So like Timmy, how he was adding the vowel sounds to his consonants, he had to be retaught that consonants have to be cut off. He also had to be taught the sounds for the special combinations, SH and TH. I've also found that children who have not been given like a key word to associate with a sound, they have a much more difficult problem with these sounds. If Timmy had been taught that SH says sh in ship, like a lot of us do teach, if he had been taught that, he would have thought, if I said, Timmy, what does SH say? He would say, it says th in ship. Oh, no, it doesn't say th, it says sh, because then he's associating a memory to that. So, he would need that in order to know exactly how many letters he was going to need in his words that he was trying to write. So why is it important, though, to go back to the beginning? Well, for two reasons. First, their self-esteem. Remember, a dyslexic student wants to have the right answer. They want to know what you're asking them. But they've been so wrong in their spelling and reading for such a long time that they're convinced that they're too dumb or able to figure it out. So they need to go back to the point where they do have the answers. They need to be strengthened in those areas, even if that means just the alphabet, so that they can feel confident in what they know before you try to attack the problems where they're struggling. The second reason to go back to the beginning is that a dyslexic mind works scientifically through equations and absolutes. Absolutes. Now, does that sound like our English language today? Absolutes and equations? No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. But this is how they see things in the world. Having this kind of a scientific mind is why dyslexics seem to be very good at math. They have to have these steps. The steps never change in math. And if they follow the steps, they're going to have the answer right every single time. They need to see that spelling, reading, and writing has those simple little steps that if they follow it every single time, they're going to come to the right answer. And these steps are what I try to teach. And this is what I'm going to try to show you today. Okay, so we're really going to get into the meat here. And the last time I taught this yesterday, I had a lot of people kind of glaze over, so it was like maybe I was thinking too deep. So just let me know if there's something that you're not understanding, you know, like give me a sign like shh, it's just over the top of my head, okay? So, but try to stay with me. I'm going to do my best to show you what I typically teach within the first 3 months of tutoring. So 3 months all into this one little session here. So we're going to go pretty quickly. All the terms that I use are on your papers there. They are from the Wilson language system. It's a curriculum that I use. It was written by a dyslexic for dyslexics, and it's up here if you want to come up later and take a look at them. This teacher manual, if you are not able to afford the entire curriculum, it's not a problem. You can buy the teacher's manual by itself. It's a great resource tool to have. Even if you're in an upper grade, you notice that a child's having a problem with a certain type of sound, you can look it up and see how they kind of, how do we approach this particular issue. So it's a great resource to have. Now, I'm not going to be able to go through everything that's on our list. What's on your list is exactly how I would teach it to a dyslexic child, but we're going to have to kind of skip around a little bit. I'm only going to teach you the concepts that are going to make our point today. All right, because we're not going to have a lot of time. So to begin, the first thing you want to make sure is that your child is grounded in their consonant sounds, like Timmy, who had to be taught that no, the vowel doesn't get added to that consonant sound. Then you teach them short vowel sounds. This is very simple. Remember, going back to the beginning. Once they're solid and grounded in the short vowel sound and those consonants, then you begin to teach them to tap out their sounds. When I'm teaching a child to tap, they, as dyslexics, they need senses used in their learning. They need experiences. So you teach them to tap. You draw out the sounds so that they can hear every single sound. And you can tap them either with your fingers or on a table. Now, as in the word up, I might say up, up, so that they can hear both sounds. So I do that. But remember, they like to learn with all their senses. So I tend to run out of fingers with the longer words, so I might teach them to tap up. Now they like that because it makes noise, but the best way I've found is with blocks. They like to tap with blocks. Now, if you have a child who is left-handed, remember we were talking about how the brain works differently. So the brain from one side to the other does not communicate well. So if you have a left-handed child, you want your blocks to be on their right side, and for whatever reason, if you can bring up your block, bring it across the face, and set it back down to indicate a tap, that seems to help the two sides of the brain communicate. So with the word up, you would reach across to go p. Remember, across the eyes. Now, if you have a right-handed student, you're going to go the opposite direction. Why it's like that? I don't know because I didn't research that every aspect of this, but I know it works. So again, if you want to do up, again, across the face, Now, no matter which direction your child is using, make sure that they are remembering that we always read from left to right. So set up your blocks from left to right. If they are the ones looking at it, whether it's on the left side or the right side, they go this way. Of course, if you are the child and you're doing it for them, make sure they're reading from left to right from their perspective. Okay, so once they can tap these, it's important to get as many of their senses involved as possible. Okay, because they have to experience their education in order to create a memory. Now, I talked about this in my first session, but they have a really hard time if they've not experienced something, like if they're reading a book or something and it's a story, they may not be able to reproduce that story to you because it's not something that they experienced themselves. So in their education, you want to try to get them to experience their education so that they can bring up that memory. So we're trying to get as many senses involved as possible. You could do this in multiple different ways. I have several different things. And remember, we're already starting that by tapping, either with sound on the table or with the sight of the blocks. Now, you can use the blocks. I also use things like a salt tray. Now, you can't see this very well, but it's got salt in here. You can use sand, and I just made this one myself. It's a shadow box with a lid. And of course, I allow them to, they spread out the sand or the salt, and they like to play with that. And they can do their letters in here. And this gives them a sense of touch. Now, that's a memory that they have created. They have experienced this word now and are able to remember that. So that is very, very helpful. You can also use magnets. I have a magnet board I tend to use. This came with my program, but it's just as easy to use like a cookie sheet with those magnets from the grocery store that go on your refrigerator. But this one is set up with my letters, and I can have them move it down to here where it'll magnet. It's same thing. Lots of color. They're touching. They can hear it click down. You're creating an experience. So these are great techniques to use. All right. Once they can understand how to tap their words with blocks or whatever, you're going to move on to digraphs. Now, the difference between what we've learned so far and digraphs is that digraphs are two letters put together but still only make one sound. So they're going to get only one single tap. All right, what do I mean? W-H, T-H, S-H, C-H, and C-K. Now, I have put these in different groups, as you can see. W-H is a sound that is only going to be found at the beginning of a word. T-H-S-H. C-H can come at the beginning or end of a word. C-K will only ever be found at the end of a word. Now, when I'm talking about a word, I am talking about a single vowel word, a single syllable. Now, we are going to get into multi-syllable words today, and we'll see how this will still be the rule. Remember, I'm trying to show you that there are equations to the English language, so you'll be able to see. Now, what would I do? How would I distinguish between WH and just W? Because in our language, in America, we say w in whale, w in will, don't we? You would teach them the British way to say it, which is taking the H sound to the front of the W. They say wh. So if I wanted a child to spell whip, they would be like, oh, that's that sound that teacher taught me. Wh, wh. I remember that. It's going to be whip. Where if I said will, they don't hear that sound, and they only hear W-I-L-L. Okay, so the difference between, now that was just something to help out, and it's specifically for spelling. There are many, many times in this program that you're going to see, I don't know that I'm going to teach them all to you today, but there are several times, particularly in this program, that the British way of saying things helps the child understand it better. Because that's where our language came from, over in England. And that's why it makes more sense. Okay, so again, these are just the beginning, both beginning or end, or just at the end, and we are talking about just a single vowel word, a single syllable word. Now, quick introduction to blends, the difference between a digraph and a blend. Now remember, we said a digraph, even though TH, we're not going to say t, we're not going to tap it as t. It makes one sound, right? TH says f. So you're still going to tap, let's say, thick has two digraphs in it. How many sounds? Th, e, k. Only 3 sounds. But as they're tapping that out, th, e, k. Then you ask them, great, what was that first sound? What letter or letters make up that sound? And then they have remembered that that's right, that's a digraph. Now, they might get to the k sound, and they might say just C or K, and you have to remind them, now, what is the rule about a single vowel word that ends with k? What's that going to be? Yeah, it's a digraph. It's always going to be that digraph, CK. This helps them in putting down that equation so that they know exactly what to do. Now, a blend, as in the word blend, a blend is anytime you have 2 consonants put together. All right, now, I have 2 consonants put together here, but they make one sound. In this word, these 2 consonants, you hear each individual sound, blend. So these 2 are going to be a blend, and these 2 are a digraph. Now, when we mark the digraph, we mark it with a double line. I mark it with a double line first to remind me that there's 2 letters in this word that represent that sound. I mark under the entire group because those 2 letters only make up one sound. Now, why would I mark these words? Well, it's plain and simple. You mark the words so that the child can see what's going on in that word. Okay, now, but why is that important? Well, remember, we're trying to get as many senses involved as possible. When they're marking, they're using touch. They can hear the sound being used. They can see what's going on. So that's why it's important. We're going to say this many, many times throughout this session. So why do I mark the word? So that the child can see what's going on in the word. Why is that important? So that we can get as many sounds involved as possible. Now, that's how you would mark a blend. A digraph. This is how you'd mark a blend with 2 dots. I mark it with 2 dots to remind me 2 letters make it up, but I can hear each individual letter. Now, important thing with a blend, when you're working with a single syllable word, the blend is going to be any time you have 2 consonants or 3 consonants together. However, in a multi-syllable word, a blend will be the letters that sort of squash together. They sound like they go together. And I'll explain that more as we get into multi-syllable words. We'll see how that works. So please just bear with me. Okay, so this would be the digraphs and the blends. Now again, we're still working with our tapping and showing the child how to tap. Now, this is where I'm going to begin to skip around on your worksheet there. So if you'll just skip right down to closed syllables, it actually might be on your other page there, we'll continue. Now, there are a total of 6 different syllables in the English language, but don't worry, I'm only teaching you 2 today because that's all that has to do with the end result that I'm trying to teach. All right, so a closed syllable and a vowel consonant E syllable are the 2 syllables that we're going to work with today. These 2 are the easiest to recognize and they're the most common in the English language. And whether a child knows it or not, they learn these as soon as they learn that a vowel has a short sound and a vowel has a long sound. Okay, now, I'm going to start with the closed syllables. Now, there are basic rules that teach a child what a closed syllable is. Remember, we're trying to learn the equations for the English language. Now, 1 plus 2 always equals 3. Same thing with a closed syllable. 1 vowel plus being ending or closed, which is where we get the name, with a consonant will always equal a short vowel sound, okay? 1 vowel ending or closed with a consonant will equal a short vowel sound. What do I mean? The word sip. Let's look at that. Does it have 1 vowel in it? Yes, it does. Does it end with a consonant? Yes, it certainly does. So automatically, it's going to be a short vowel sound. Now, this is an equation. If it has this plus this, it will be short. What about if it has a digraph? Such. All right, does it still follow our rule? Does it have 1 vowel? Does it end with a consonant? Yes, it does. Even though there are 2 consonants here, and they do make 1 sound, they're still a consonant, aren't they? So it will still be a short vowel sound. Now, we mark a closed syllable by marking all letters involved in that syllable and marking it with a C for closed. Now, again, this particular word is a 1-syllable word. So we're going to mark everything in that syllable. But in a multi-syllable word, you're only going to underline the letters that are involved in that syllable. So, why are we marking this word? Well, we're marking it so that the child can see what's going on in the word. Why is that important? Because we're trying to have as many senses involved as possible. Okay, so I have shown you the rules for this. Now, but we know there are a couple of things, aren't there, that don't follow this rule, do they? I will give you an example. Bold. All right, does it have 1 vowel? Yes. Does it end with a consonant? Yep. Yes, it does. Is it a short vowel sound? No, it is not. What is it? Well, this is a weld. I have not taught you welds because I didn't have the time, but it is on your, if you'll flip over your sheet, it's on the bottom of the sheet, and you'll see that I teach the children welds in groups. There are 3 groups there. Basic welds, sister welds, and brother welds. And you'll see right next to it, it says that the basic welds and the sister welds are short, but brother welds are long. Now, yes, we know that there are exceptions to everything in the English language. What this curriculum does is teach it as a concept. They don't have to memorize that, oh, that's the one rule, that's the one word that's going to break this rule. No, they've learned, because I've taught them up to this point, what the welds are. And I teach them in such a way that it's like popcorn when they reproduce it. I can flash the different sounds at them, and they have to tell me short, long, whichever one it is. Okay, or I have to say, I can tell them, I can flash it at them, and they say, oh, brother, sister, basic, whichever. And they know it like this, and they recognize it. So they recognize this concept that this is a weld, this is a brother weld, and a brother weld is long. So this is the exception rule. And as you can see, there's only 5 of them. It's not that difficult for them to pick up on that concept. So it's still going to be marked as a closed syllable. We still underline it with a C, but because it is a long vowel sound, it gets marked with a long vowel sound, and it is an exception with an X. All right, so why would I mark this word this way? Yes, ma'am.
I don't mean to interrupt, but I'm a kindergarten, 1st grade teacher,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm just finding some that seem to be having some issues. Can you do this right in the 1st grade and start?
You can start this in preschool. Okay. This program is designed that it can start from the very time that they start to learn their consonants. So yes, but I have also taught this same skill all the way back to the beginning of a high schooler. So you can do it with both. Again, it's that idea of going back to the fundamentals, the basics. Okay, so once they have learned these and they can reproduce it like popcorn, They understand, okay, it's still a closed syllable, but it breaks the rule, but it's a concept. There's a reason behind every time that it breaks that rule. Yes, ma'am.
What would be the problem that you teach all the children this? This would be good for all the children, not just dyslexic.
This is true. Now, this is a point that I'm going to get to later on in our lesson. I have talked to some older teachers, some older women. I've talked to my mother, and they tell me that these types of things that they were taught when they were in school. Now, that would have been, as far as my children are in school now, that would have been 2 generations ago. It may not have been taught this way, but this idea was taught. It wasn't taught to me in my generation, and it's certainly not being taught to my children. So, is it that we have more and more and more dyslexics? Or is it that we're losing some of our education, and now they're starting to show up more? Yes, that is correct. Now, I do know that there are dyslexics, and there were dyslexics 100 years ago, but you didn't know them unless they were so severe that they could not even get down these concepts. Okay, so very good point. Thank you for bringing that out. Okay, now again, we have shown how we mark these closed syllables and why that's important. Now, I'm not going to show you every exception to every rule that we're learning today because it doesn't have to do with my main goal. So lucky you don't have to learn them all right? But now that you understand the closed syllables, we can move on to that vowel consonant E syllable that I was talking about. This is the one where we start to get the idea of the long vowel sounds. So you've learned the short vowel sounds and the exception, and now we move on to the long vowel sound. How is it going to be marked? Well, it's going to be indicated with a vowel consonant E. That means that the pattern will look like a vowel with a consonant in between, and it will end with an E. Okay? As in the word make. Now, the first thing I do is teach the children that E at the end of a multi-vowel word or a multi-syllable word will never, ever, ever say its name. That's the first thing that you teach them. It will never say its name. Yes, it will say E in me. That is correct. But that is a syllable that we are not learning today. It's called an open syllable, and it's only got 1 vowel. It doesn't have these 2. So when you have 2 vowels or more in a word, and it has, or a multi-syllable word, doesn't matter, E will never, ever, ever say its name. Why is that? Okay, well, it's silent. It still wants to help. So it's going to lend its strength to its friend. Now, its friends are only vowels. Its friends are not consonants. But it only has enough strength to jump over 1 letter. And I'm sure you've all taught your children this. So that E lends its strength to its A friend and makes it long. Okay, so very simple. They learned that when they were learning short vowel, long vowel sounds. Okay, so how do we mark it? We're going to mark all the letters involved in that syllable. And we're going to mark it with our pattern, vowel, consonant, and an E, just like that. Something important to note here. When you have S between 2 vowels, it will tend to make the Z sound. Okay, what do I mean? As in the word wise. Okay, 2 vowels, 1 here, 1 here. In between of it is an S. The S will tend to, not always, but it will tend to say Z. So, if you were asking a dyslexic child to write the word wise, their brain, their mind is going to want to do this. Wise, just like that. Okay, and then you remind them, great, that's good. You always want to encourage, remember that self-esteem issue. Okay, good. What vowel sound did you make here? Well, I. Is that a long or short vowel? Oh yeah, it's long. Well, how am I going to indicate that it's long instead of a closed syllable, which is short? Oh, right. I have to add an E. Excellent. Very, very good. Now, what did I tell you about the Z sound in between 2 vowels? Oh, right. I forgot. It's supposed to be an S. Now, from those rules that we have taught, from those steps that we are making them learn, they were able to calculate how to spell this word, right? So now they have an equation and they have steps to use. All right, so let's see where I'm at. Then, once you have been able to teach these 2 syllables, you can move on to multi-syllable words. Up to this point, we've only been working with single-syllable words. So what is a multi-syllable word? A multi-syllable word is something with more than one syllable in it. Simple. All right, so it's what gives us rules of exactly where we're going to divide our words. You were probably taught in school to hear the sounds. You can tap the sounds out. Remember, we've been tapping just the sounds of the words. Now we want to change over from tapping individual letters like k, at, to now we're going to tap syllables like elephant. All right? Very simple. Tap the syllable. L, fent. 3 syllables in that word. Great. What's that first syllable sound? L. How do you spell that? See how it breaks it down so it simplifies it. Okay, now you were probably taught in school to hear that. Elephant, correct. You may have also been taught to put your hand under your chin and feel them. Elephant, great. Not a hard thing to do. But what about the word communicate? What's the first syllable in that? What do we hear? Ka. Is that where we break up that syllable? No, it's not, because that word has 2 M's in it. So we break it after the M. Come, but that's not how we say it. So what are the rules for this? All right. So on your sheet there, I have written out that we're going to get to the multi-syllables. I've already done this. There's my chalk. All right. And you can write in, we're going to work on these different multi-syllable words, and you can put it in where we're dividing. First is the word winter. The first rule in syllable division always wants you to find your vowels. You will never have more syllables than you have vowels in a word. Okay? So never more. You always need at least 1 in every syllable. Now, as we learned with the vowel consonant E, you can have 2 vowels in a syllable, but you'll be able to locate it. You'll be able to recognize it. So first thing you want to do is find your vowels and only be concerned with what is in between those vowels. Let's find them. What are our vowels? I and E. What's in between those vowels? Just in between. And T, which are 2 consonants. We're going to mark them like that. So 2 consonants. The first rule says divide between 2 consonants. Always. Simple enough. Okay, not a big deal. That's the first rule. What, though, are we going to do if we've only got 1 consonant between? As in the word cabin. All right, so where's our vowels? A, I. What's between it? Only the B. So how are we going to know if we should divide before the B or after the B? Well, this rule says when you can make a syllable closed, do it. So what do we have here? Remember the rules for a closed syllable? It has to have 1 vowel plus what? It needs a consonant. So where are we going to divide this word? If we want to keep it closed, if we want to keep the vowel closed, we're going to have to divide it after the B. Because then what does that make this syllable? It's closed, right? What about that second syllable? Is that closed? It's got a vowel. It ends with a consonant. It's still closed. Okay, so when we can, we're going to do it. All right? That's what that rule says. Now, what about when we have those digraphs, those welds, that kind of a thing? Here's a word, rocket. So we're only concentrating on our vowels, O and E. What's in between of it? CK. Is there something special about CK? It's a digraph. It's 1 sound, exactly. So what was that rule we just learned? Remember, CK cannot be divided. Where are we going to do this then? Is it going to be before the CK or after? Well, based on the last rule we just learned, we want to keep it closed. So we're also going to do this. It's a closed syllable and another closed syllable. This also follows that rule that we talked about at the beginning with digraphs, that a digraph will only ever, this particular digraph, will only ever be found at the end of a word or its syllable. Only found at the end. Okay. Now, what about a word like bankrupt? We're going to find our vowels. A, U. What's between it? N, K, and R. Now, you didn't learn this with me, but the child would have learned this with me. A and K is a sister weld. And the child would have learned that the A and K always has to stay together. Now, being a sister weld, it tells you that sister welds are always short. So this is a short vowel sound. So we are going to have to, between this and this, we're going to have to break it here. And the A and K is going to allow this to remain closed, as well as this one. Okay, so that is the rule for that. Now, what about compound words? Well, very simply, we really don't even have to go into compound words because the children know the words. Compound words are going to be divided between their words. Sandstone, stop sign. They automatically know that, well, stop is a word and sign is a word, so they don't even have to really be taught that. But that is one of the rules as well. All right, now that what we've learned, okay, we're going to try to put this into practice. Okay, so remember, I'm teaching you this as an equation. If you were a dyslexic child and you came across a word either in reading or spelling that you had never heard before or never read before, could you decipher it? Could you figure it out as an equation? So that's what we're going to do. Based on what I have taught you so far. And actually, I used this. I did this for one of my students. I came across this word, and that's why I use it as my example. I offered it in his spelling test. I offered it as a bonus because I was like, oh, they've never heard this word before. You know, they get very overwhelmed, and they're going to be overwhelmed. And I told him, break up your syllables. You know how to divide your syllables. And if you're dividing your syllables, tap out the sounds in each individual syllable and see if you can do this. And I gave him a bonus. No problems. Let's see how you do. Okay, here was the word. Now, if you were to try to read this word, if you were dyslexic, you might come into a sentence and you're going to say the small words that you know. This store was... I mean, that's really what they do. They either try to guess at the word or, but we're trying to get them to see it as an equation. Can they decide this as an equation? Now, what do we first do when we're trying to divide syllables? What do we find first? Our vowels. So let's find our first two vowels, I and E. Now, we're only concerned with what's between them. What is between them? An S, which is one consonant. What's the rule? Where are we going to divide it? Based on what I've taught you so far. After the S, so it's closed. Excellent. Now, what do we know about a closed syllable? What's the vowel sound going to say? Short. Can that child read this syllable? As a syllable, they can. Now, once they have found that syllable, they don't have to be concerned with it at all. They move on to the next two vowels. So, what are the next two vowels? E and A. Excellent. What's between them? Three consonants. Now, you know what? One thing I left out one of the divisions, and it was with the blend, but I can go over it right here. All right, so if we've got these three letters, how are we going to know where to divide it? Now, this is what I forgot to go. I'm sorry, I missed a step in my divisions. This has to do with those blends that we were talking about, okay? Now, is it going to be or is it going to be fr? Which one goes together better? Yes, the FR, but the rule says for a blend, when in doubt, if you're not sure, like if there's something that sounds like, the word was inspect that I was going to show you, and is it going to be ns or sp? Both of them sound like they could go together. So the rule says, when in doubt, the blend stays with the second syllable that you're working with. So, and as you've already divided it. Okay, so that makes this syllable what? Closed. Excellent. And so it's going to be what vowel sound? Short. Excellent. All right. So now they have discovered and they know how to read those first two syllables. Covering it up, moving on. We have the A and we have an I. What's in between? 1, 2, 3 consonants. Anything special about those consonants? Digraph. Do digraphs ever get divided? No! So now I'm left with actually only one consonant and one consonant. I automatically know where to divide. What is this syllable? F-R-A-N. Closed. Can they read that? What kind of a vowel is it going to be? Short. And then they can read that syllable. Now again, we figured all these out, so we're just figuring out the last syllable now. What do we have? An I and an E at the end. Nothing else left. E never, ever, ever, ever says its name at the end of a multi-syllable word. Gives its strength to its friend. Makes it long. What kind of a vowel, a syllable is this? It's the other one. Not open. It was vowel, consonant, E. That's all right. Vowel, consonant, E has a pattern. Vowel, consonant, E. What's in between those two vowels? An S, which says Z. Yes, so now that they have discovered all these things, can they read this? Syllable by syllable. Now it's simple. It's an equation that they were able to figure out from the rules that we gave them. Now, if I had asked them to write this, spell it for the first time, divide it into syllables first. You can hear them. Dis, and, fran, chise. Good. What was the first syllable? Dis. Tap out your first syllable. D-is. Can you spell that? Yes, they can. So now not only can they decode this word, take it apart so that they can read it, now they can encode it and put it back together. Okay, so that is what is so important about this. So each step of what we just learned becomes an equation that will allow them to calculate these words. Now, most students can figure this out all on their own. Dyslexics have to know why these letters work together. But a lot of kids can figure it out on their own. It's like those math students. If you're doing a long division problem, you have students, any students, that can look at a long division problem and say, okay, I'm going to have to subtract here and I'm going to have to multiply here and I can get my answer. Well, I don't have to write that down because I know that the answer by subtracting there is going to be this, and they skip those steps, right? Then you have other students who are like, ooh, I have to see every single step, so I'm going to have to write down that I subtract here, and I'm going to have to write down that I multiply here. And they'll still come out with the same answer. Same with dyslexics. Okay, you have children who can figure it out by just skipping over the steps. But these children can't. They have to see each and every step. And that's why it is so important to teach them that there are equations in the English language. Now, what though if you don't have anybody who's teaching this? You still have students, you still have schools who they don't have anything like this. They're not teaching this. What are we going to do for them? Can we help them? Yes, we still can. I'm talking especially with the older children. All right. As teachers, we can change the dynamics of their learning. Now, you and I know that stress is going to hinder learning, right? We all know that. Anytime we can't control something, we can get stressed. I don't know about you, but maybe I was going too fast and you got a little stressed out because you couldn't control how fast I was going. Maybe you got stressed. Well, children generally, if they have to read aloud or if they have to do a project or a test, they get stressed. And this is so much more with a dyslexic child. They are more vulnerable to this stress. So what can we do to take out the stress of their learning? How about test talk? I'm talking about you're a teacher, you've trained them, you've taught them, you're about ready to give the test. Instead of having them just take it, have them put their pencils and pens on the floor, pass out the test, and how about reading through the instructions? Anybody got a question? And then, I'm not sure what you're looking for here. Well, then you as a teacher might know, maybe I didn't go over that section so well, and you can re-explain. Okay, or maybe you have the time to actually read every question, and that would be great. And what about asking the children to kind of talk amongst themselves? Not as in, what's the answer to number 7? No. How about, what would be the best way to approach this test? And little Johnny says, well, there's a word bank here, so I'm going to use every word that I know the answers to, and I'm going to have what's left over, and I'm going to make my best guess from there. Well, good. Well, you might think, well, duh, doesn't everybody do that? No, they don't. They get stressed, especially dyslexic children, and they forget. How can they do their best here? So now you have children who you're reading the test to, you're reading, they were all nervous, and all of a sudden, teacher's kind of talking about things, and she's already gone over this section, and now my friends are saying, hey, you could do this or you could do that. And I'm looking at it, and I know the answers to some of these. Now the stress is gone from taking that test. So why don't we do that? Well, how about, can you grade a child on more than just what's on a test or quiz? Yes, you can. All right, I was asked one time by a director of education for younger elementary students. She asked me, if you could give me just one thing, and one thing only, in a very quick amount of time, that would help a dyslexic student the best, what would you say? And I said, grade them on what they understand and not what they can reproduce on paper. Okay, so if a child can demonstrate that they understand what you're teaching, why don't you allow yourself to grade them on that? All right, I'm talking, we do this in math all the time. A child is going to calculate problems and stuff, and one little miscalculation, and they're going to get the answer wrong. But do we just automatically say, oh, wrong? No. We say, well, they knew what they were doing. They followed all the steps. I can give them partial credit. Well, why not that for a child who's dyslexic in other things? I had a teacher who took my son, who's dyslexic, and she was teaching him science. He was struggling with it very, very badly. A lot of reading to it. And she worked with him, and she knew, he understood everything. She gave the test. He failed. He got a 54. But she knew. We went over this. I know he knows this. She had him come in afterwards. She said, Jesse, I'm going to read this test to you. You just tell me what you think about it. Give me the answers, anything that you can think of. And she gave him credit for what he could tell her about it. He got an 85. He knew what the process was. He knew what he was talking about. He just couldn't put it down on paper. How about some coded communication? You know that if you've got a child in your class and they are struggling, they're embarrassed. Okay, they don't want everybody to know that they struggle. So they're not gonna, sit and work on their assignment and be like, "Ooh, teacher, I don't understand this." They're not gonna do it. But even with my son, he'll struggle with sections. And the teachers have worked with him that, hey, if you have a section that you just don't understand what I'm looking for or whatever, how about you circle it, put a little question mark, and I'll know that section. I'm not going to grade. We're going to go over it together. Okay, we can do that. Or how about a child who you hand them one of those fluorescent 3x5 cards, and you just say, hey, anytime you have a question or don't know what to do, why don't you put this card on the edge of your desk? And when I see that, I'll know you need a little help, and I can come by your desk. And that way, they don't have to be singled out. Right? These are coded communications. And then, obviously, take full advantage of all the technology that we have today. Remember, they have a difficult time reproducing memories that they have not experienced. So if you're giving a lecture, they're just sitting there listening, right? They're going to have a hard time reproducing that later. Maybe they can record it. Audio record. Maybe they need to take pictures of things like this that we've done on the board. I know schools have rules about phones in the classroom, but they can take the phone and put it on your desk. You can get special permission for that. Then there's all sorts of programs out there. My son recently found Speechify. Speechify will let him take a picture of a paper, and it starts to read to him what's on that paper. They're all going to have their flaws. It can't work with every single font that there is, but there's lots of things out there. I hope that I haven't gone too fast on all this stuff and that you were able to understand everything. I was trying to disclose as much information here as possible. Now, my goal was to help you understand that these children just have to see it as an equation, and there are equations in the English language. I have given you my business card. I would love to hear from you if you have any questions on this. If your school has questions, I do consultation work, I do different things. So please feel free and contact me. Does any of you have a question? Yes?
What's the definition of that word?
That's a great question, and I honestly, I've kind of got it, but I'm not sure. It's like if the sentence were, that company disenfranchised itself from the mother company. It split apart, yes.
McDonald's is
I
all
chuckled when you wrote
individual.
that because my husband and I actually were talking and using that word on the way here because he looked up something else and it was something about some church or something and they had disenfranchised themselves from it. And it was like, oh, that's a big word. And we chatted about it on the way to the LLC.
And you know, things like this, when they are reading, when a child is reading, they're spending so much time trying to figure out these words a lot of times that, you know, they're not understanding what's actually in the sentence. So when you're teaching them this and you're teaching them to read this way, you are teaching them to read syllable by syllable. And as they're going along, remember I said once it'll become automatic for them. My son could look at this word and he automatically, his eyes go right to those vowels, and that is how he reads. So it would be the difference between saying, that company was, and then he'll guess at the word, from the mother company. That doesn't tell him anything. He doesn't understand that. But if he stopped and said, that company was disenfranchised from the other company, it helps him to smooth out that thought so that even if he didn't understand that word, it helps him to understand what's going on in the sentence. So then he can figure out what's being said and he can comprehend what's going on. That's the difference. To be, you know, reading, but not comprehending what you're reading, that's the difficulty they're having.